Post in chat. Perfect, perfect. Because I will be monitoring the chat as we go along. Okay, so great. So we have it set to record right now. So I'll say welcome again to everyone joining via recording. My name is Professor Karen Snow, and I will be your guide today in the delving into Dewey Decimal classification. This is kind of set, I believe, for a couple hours. So I do want there to be a break, if any, just even like a 5-minute kind of stretch and bio break so that we can just kind of step away for a moment. But I'll be watching the time to make sure that I do that. Okay, so because this can be a lot going on. So all right, and I am currently a professor and the PhD program director at Dominican University's School of Information Studies. Okay, so I teach primarily in the areas of cataloging, classification, metadata. I've been to Dominican about 12 years, and I recognize actually many names in the participant list is either current or former students. So hi, I wish I could see your lovely faces, but I'm glad to see names that I recognize there. But if not, then hello, welcome, nice to meet you. Like I said, I want this to be interactive. So I am going to present on Dewey and Webdewey, but I'm also going to have some activities in areas where I may stop and kind of ask you questions as well, because I do want to hear about you and your needs, right? I think each library is going to be a little bit different in terms of their Dewey, procedures and needs. So let's talk about that, right? So, okay, just also monitoring the chat here to see if there's anything else I need to get to before I start my PowerPoint, which I will send to you all after that. I guess someone will send it to you. I'm not quite sure. I can send it to Sarah perhaps, and who can send it along afterwards. So I'm going to go ahead and share my screen. Okay, yeah, so Sarah Ferger is confirming that I can send it to her and she'll pass it along so that if you want to have my PowerPoint, you may have it. So I do not mind that at all. Okay, so with that said, like I said, I encourage you seriously to please post in chat as we go along because I will be monitoring it. I have the power to do that, to show our PowerPoint slides and monitor the chat at the same time. So once again, welcome. So today, on our little nifty agenda, I can't cover everything, as you can imagine. Dewey is like seemingly a bottomless well of of standard. There's a lot that we could cover that could probably take days, but I picked out some things that I think at least would be most useful for you, with the understanding that I realize we have different levels of knowledge here on Dewey, right? Some of you may have been working with Dewey for many, many years and have a decent grasp on it, where though some of you all may know very little about it, okay? So keep that in mind that I may start with kind of a more, okay, yeah, that's really obvious, but just once again, different knowledge levels here. I want to make sure everyone feels like they know what's going on. So, right. So in terms of what we're going to talk about, so speaking of kind of starting with kind of more foundational knowledge, what is library classification? Like, what is the whole point of this, right? Why would we even need to have something like the Dewey Decimal System to organize our collection? So once again, not going to go into a lot of depth here, but I want to make sure that we understand kind of why, right? Why do we even need to have a classification system to organize our collections? Also, just a little bit of background on Dewey, as well as some features of Dewey that may help explain the system a little bit better. What you're seeing, right? You may notice, right, there's a bunch of numbers here, but let's talk about kind of some background and the meaning of that. And then I want to talk about Webdewey, kind of the main portal that we use now to access Dewey decimal classification. So feel free to just to type in chat. Let me know if you were able to get a free trial for Webdewey. Does everybody either have access to Webdewey or are pretty sure you have access to Webdewey, either just because your institution subscribes to it or you got the free trial? Can everyone, pardon me, give me a sense of how well that worked? because I would like to use this opportunity today for you to use Webdewey. Okay, I'm seeing some a yes, I see an I do. Okay, a yes. Okay, don't have it. Okay. Okay, good. Yeah, so there's we use Webdewey. Perfect. Okay, so unable to get it to work. Yikes. Okay. Um, so it looks like there's kind of a mixed here. It looks like most of the people posting say that they do have access to Webdewey, where some don't. So that's not going to necessarily be a deal breaker here. You know, if you know, like you said, I can you can see about trying to do the exercises without that, but for the most part, this is I want to kind of expose you all to Webdewey and to the benefits of using Webdewey. And I do find, just to kind of get on my soapbox for just a second here, it's important, for people doing cataloging to have access to tools. And I know it's not necessarily your fault personally for not being able to access Webdewey, but it's in order to kind of cataloger to do their job, I think it's important for the library to invest in the tools that we need to do our job. So I always find it kind of unfortunate when I hear that not everyone has access to things like, Webdewey or like Classification Web or RDA Toolkit, though I understand, right? Because some of these things, they cost money that libraries may not have. So, right, so I'm not going to dive into Webdewey right away. So if you can kind of, if you want, it's up to you. If you can, I don't know how quickly the Webdewey like free trial can be, provided for you, but something to kind of look into just as an FYI. I'd like to look at that, right? And then we'll talk about assigning Dewey numbers, okay, using Webdewey, how to do that, okay? Because I'm sure that many of you may do like copy cataloging, where the Dewey number may be already provided for you in the record, but that may not always be the case. Or maybe it's a Dewey number that you feel like, I'd rather choose a different one. So let's talk about how to find them as well. I also want to go a little bit deeper and talk about the Dewey tables, okay? Since Dewey, it's partially like what's called a faceted classification scheme, where building a Dewey number is quite important, okay? So you can just kind of take a number just directly from Webdewey, but sometimes it's helpful to add further numbers to that for greater specificity. In Table 1, the standard subdivisions are a great way to do that. So we'll talk a bit about the Table 1. There's other tables, but once again, due to time restrictions, won't have tons of time to be looking at those, but just wanted to kind of give you a taste of the tables. And also just give you a taste of classifying a particular type of resource that I'm sure that many of you all have in your institutions, such as biographies. Okay, what's going on with that? So once again, just because I can't cover all the things that we may classify, I thought I'd just kind of talk a little bit about this one, because I think it's kind of nicely exemplifies kind of Dewey, Dewey, the Dewiness of Dewey, so to speak. And then finally, some tips and tricks on finding Dewey class numbers if you don't have Webdewey, what to do. But even if you do have Webdewey, some other sources that might be helpful in finding Dewey numbers that fit. So, okay. All right. So that's it. That's it. Yeah. That's a lot. That's a lot. So, and like I said, I really like to see discussion of this as well. So if anything that I say kind of comes up, they're like, oh, that's interesting, I want to ask a question about that, please do. Let's talk. All right, because I want this to be helpful for you there. Also, I want this to be somewhat useful for me, and just in all selfishness. I will say that I have a new book out. It's called A Practical Guide to Dewey Decimal Classification, published by Rowman and Littlefield, actually just this month. I actually just found out the other day that I think the hardcover has been available, at least on Amazon and the Rowman and Littlefield website, since January. But the paperback should be coming out any day now. So if this is of interest to you and you want to dive a little bit deeper into Dewey than what I'm able to cover here, my book does that. I mean, not to a super extent, right? This is only like 150 pages. It's not super in depth on Dewey. It's like I said, it's a practical guide, right? It's kind of to help you get started with Dewey Decimal Classification and using Webdewey, and but I go into a little bit more depth on like the tables and like literature class and things like that that I'm not going to have time to cover today. But if you're interested, I have a lot of exercises that I provide for most chapters, and other things. So it's very similar if you're familiar with my other two books. Maybe not. I mean, especially if you don't use Library of Congress classification. My first book was on Library of Congress classification. But then I also have one on Library of Congress subject headings as well that came out a few years ago. So once again, like pretty quick little slender volumes if you're interested in once again practical advice on assigning either LC or Dewey classification or assigning Library of Congress subject headings. So okay, spiel over. Just wanted to point that out because some of this comes from my book. Okay. All right, so here we go. So what is library classification? What is up with this? So for our purposes, this is the process of fitting a resource into predetermined hierarchy of concepts and then assigning notation that represents that resource's topic. So I'm assuming most of you all, you're familiar with the library catalog record where we also have subject headings, right? Terms that represent particular concepts. Now, classification does something similar, but for the main classification systems that we use in the United States, we don't use like English terms. There are some classification systems that do, like BISAC, the book industry standard, uses English terms, but the main classification systems we use in the United States primarily use either numeric, so numbers, in the notation or alphanumeric notation, so numbers and letter combinations, okay, to represent a particular topic, essentially. And this serves a dual purpose. First of all, having this notation helps bring together or co-locate works on the same topic on the shelf, ideally, but it doesn't have to be, because it provides a physical or virtual address for the resource, okay? So it's primarily used, I think, for shelving purposes, right? To kind of locate an item again on the shelf, but it can also be assigned to digital resources as well to provide, once again, the topical coverage, but you don't really necessarily need that to like physically locate it, right? So, we use like the classification systems for both of these purposes. So, and the two most popular classification systems in the United States are, I just mentioned it because in my book, one being the Dewey Decimal Classification, or the Dewey Decimal System, as people say, is officially the Dewey Decimal Classification. So that's why I use DDC. You can recognize Dewey, at least when you find a library classification notation in the United States. If it's all numbers, it's a good chance it's Dewey, okay? So only numbers in the class number, possibly a decimal point. It is the Dewey Decimal System, after all, but not all Dewey numbers have a decimal point, okay? That's only if you want to be more specific in the notation. But most importantly, only numbers in the actual classification number. And it's used primarily by school and public libraries, but not exclusively. Some of you may know that like Chicago Public Library, for example, uses the Library of Congress classification, okay, from the Library of Congress, or LCC for short. This one, you can always tell if it's Dewey because it always begins with at least one capital letter, okay? It has both numbers and letters. Sometimes there's multiple capital letters at the beginning of the classification number, and then the rest of it is numbers, possibly a decimal as well, okay? LC also uses decimals. So just because you see a decimal, don't assume it's Dewey. Once again, Chicago Public Library uses Library of Congress classification, but it's primarily used by academic libraries because it's really designed for really large collections, okay, for that. Dewey, you can assign Dewey, right, for a lot of very specific topics, but as we'll talk about, the numbers kind of get super long if you do that, whereas LC call numbers tend to stay pretty compact regardless of the specificity of the topic. Okay. Some of you may say, well, we don't use Dewey or LC for everything, right? So it's not uncommon for libraries to have their own call numbers. or just the way of organizing their system that does not necessarily require Dewey or LC, any particular class number. So here I just have examples from my local library where like J represents in this case like juvenile and not like an actual class letter or something. And then like, the first 3 letters of the author's last name, or whatever. So and then F in this case, I think representing fiction and so forth. So I'm assuming for most of you all where you work, you have something like this, mainly probably for like your fiction, maybe, or is there anyone here that actually uses Dewey for like their main like fiction collection, like the individual fiction in particular? I'm just curious, because that tends to be the trend now, is that, and that's why honestly I'm not going to go in a lot of detail about classifying like individual fiction works, because that's not done, right? Yeah, don't be shy. Don't be shy. Post in chat if you want, because you don't have to. But this is nothing. There's nothing inherently wrong with this. Okay, Sarah, thank you. So your library does not use Dewey to classify fiction, even for like maybe collections of fiction. It's still like, because you have like the individual authors, for example, but then you also have like maybe anthologies or something like that. I don't know if anyone does that, but LC, I will say LC is much better in terms of providing kind of unique call numbers for individual authors, where Dewey is not so much that way. Oftentimes you end up with like the same class number for many different authors, but which can be problematic for larger collections, right? If you really want people to find a known item, a very specific item, having the same call number for like 50 different items can be problematic, right? And finding something on the shelf. Okay, so you have an 800 section, but it's primarily for poetry. Yeah, okay. No, that's fair. Yeah, that was what to say. So that's, even though Dewey, you can classify fiction in Dewey, I find that, yeah, many libraries don't do that. You may have it for like, poetry or drama, various things, other forms of literature. Okay, it's good to know. I kind of figured that, but I just wanted to kind of double check on that. So thank you. Thank you. Okay, so once again, nothing wrong with this, right? You need to have a system that makes sense for your users. That's the most important thing. You want people to be able to find the stuff in your collection. That is the most important goal that you should have. So let's talk a little bit about the background of Dewey. Like I said, not going to go into a whole lot of depth here, just because that's really not the main focus of this webinar, because I want this to primarily be like focused on the practical aspects. But it's also important to know kind of a little bit of the background behind the development of the Dewey Decimal Classification, because it hasn't always been the case that we've used this type of library classification system. It was created, the Dewey Decimal Classification at least, by Melville Dewey. Okay, so in 1876, that's when it first came out. He was still a student at Amherst College in Amherst, Massachusetts, and he'd been reading all sorts of like, classification theories, because he'd been frustrated with how libraries had been organizing their collections, primarily organizing their collections up to that point, which is called a fixed location system. So they primarily organized their collections by, and people found the resources in their collection by where the item was physically located in the library. So they may have broad categories like, history or science and so forth. But then on the shelves, the items would be organized by, when they came into the collection, essentially. So, this bookcase 5, shelf 4, item 3. But as we know from, working in libraries, is that books can shift around, right? They don't always stay in the same spot for a variety of different reasons. And so that fixed location system created a lot of stress, I think, for the libraries, because there was also, a lot of reclassification happening. People were not finding things easily. So Dewey had kind of had enough of this. And here's Melville Dewey with his son, Godfrey, back in 1888. Godfrey, who also became a Dewey Decimal Classification editor himself later on in his life. Melville Dewey decided that there needed to be a better way to approach this. So he created what's called a relative location system in the Dewey Decimal, where each library item can have a permanent address that can be used at any library. It didn't matter when a particular item came into your library and where it physically was on the shelf. It should have an address, so to speak, to show how it fits in relation to other items on the same topic. Okay, so we can still use this classification regardless of what library you're at, regardless of the physical location. So this relative location system was new, right, at this point. This is not something that libraries used. And so at the time, people were just like, this is great. This is fantastic. We need to use this. It was first published as classification and subject index for cataloging and arranging the books and pamphlets of a library by Melville Dewey. You can see here on the right-hand side that the Dewey main structure is not radically different than it is now, if you're familiar with how it is now. You can see that all the Dewey numbers, they are, the main class numbers are 3 digits long, except for the generalities class, which was 000 to us now was just 0 at the time, and then 10, 20, 30, and so forth. But once again, largely the same structure, the same main disciplines, as we'll talk more about. So just kind of some slightly different names for them. Right? So theology is religion. Right? Sociology is social sciences. Philology, languages, useful arts, the 600s, is now technology. Okay, so those used to be the useful arts. That's why there's quite a bit of topics in quote unquote technology that seem a little strangely placed there, right? So they has like domestic economy and agriculture and all this in there, but used to be called the useful arts. Okay, kind of the application of the sciences, so to speak. So you can also, I couldn't fit the whole thing on this slide, but you can also see, and I'll talk about this a little bit more later, a bit of the kind of Anglo-American, American Western Europe bias in Dewey, looking at like the literature class, for example, the 800s, where we have like, English, German, French, Italian, Spanish, Latin, and Greek taking up the vast majority of that class, where just everything else is shoved in the 890s. And it's not vastly different today, unfortunately. So, but that's, once again, it's kind of built into the structure, so it's been difficult to make those changes. So here's Dewey now, the 10 main classes organized by discipline, not by subject. As many of you probably know, in working with Dewey, it's, topics can kind of be everywhere in Dewey, right? Not all just in one place. I'll talk more about that in just a minute. But just kind of keep that in mind, right? That Dewey is organized by discipline and not by subject. So within, like science is a discipline, and literature and so forth. Okay, so for that reason, you can find topics like dogs, for example. You get to look at my puppies. Sorry, I thought I had their names here, and I lost that somehow. Anyway, so Wallace here, my golden retriever on the left, and Pandora, my shepherd there on the right. My little puppies. Dogs and Dewey can be all over the place, right? As you probably know, right? It's not just like one dog section of Dewey. It just kind of depends on the disciplinary approach of the work itself. So we have like dogs within animal husbandry in the 600s, but also dogs within zoology in the 500s, and so on and so forth. So I don't know, once again, feel free if you want in the chat, if you have a particular way of kind of organizing your collection that kind of, is not necessarily all Dewey, because within nonfiction, you may just kind of keep it, just pure Dewey. But if you do have a way to like organize your collections where it is more, right, like trying to pull together the subjects regardless of the Dewey number, feel free to say so in the chat. I'd love to hear. I always like to hear what kind of individual libraries are doing. If the Dewey classification is not really doing it for you, you like to modify for the sake of your patrons. I like to hear that. So I think, yeah, here we go. So maybe this is a little bit different now, but I have these photos from Gail Borden Library where they have these zones. I'm not quite sure exactly if they kind of bring together, like, for example, all the works on science and nature here and business and money. These may just be kind of just, the new ones that they've kind of pulled out. But that might be an approach, right? Kind of deciding like, look, as opposed to having our dog books scattered throughout, our library will have kind of these separate sections where like all the dog books are kind of brought together so people can find anything on dogs in one spot. And I know that like in the kids section, once again, I'd like to hear what you all do for your kids section. If you do keep, I mean, fiction, right? That's rarely, I think, in Dewey in the children's section, but with your nonfiction juvenile collection, if you do anything different, right? If you just kind of keep it ordered by Dewey, or if you try to kind of separate things out so they're a little bit easier to find. Okay, Joy, you mentioned that the intended audience plays a part in the decision. Absolutely. Okay, right. So you have all the children's train books, right? Nonfiction are you put them kind of together. Okay, so okay, to categories. Okay, so thank you, Laura. And then Julie, you do something different for interesting, graphic novels and manga. Interesting, yeah. Because as you probably know, right? Like I think as long as the patrons they're finding what they're looking for, you know, knowing the Dewey number, you know, I think intellectually is helpful to kind of keep things together on the shelf. But if that's not happening the way you want it to, where people are not finding what they're looking for, it makes sense to kind of recategorize if you think that works. But you know, deciding those categories though may also be a little bit tricky, right? I've always, whenever I see this in the ribbons and bows, I kind of have a reaction to that. Just kind of like, well, first of all, like how do you decide what goes in ribbons and bows or what goes in these various categories? But anyway, but yeah, you just kind of have to make, I guess, a local decision at your library, kind of what you think would fit best, and just kind of make sure everybody's on board and understands what goes in what category. So, okay, so GAPL is going to Dewey Light. Interesting. So prime segmentation in Bridge Dewey. Okay, max of 3 digits past the decimal, and so I go into categories. Oh, just for the youth department. Interesting. Okay. Thank you, Kate. I always like to hear this, see what everybody's doing a little bit differently. Oh, Nanette, you're Dewey free. So you're just here to learn, just kind of good for fun. Learn Dewey for fun. Oh, interesting. Okay. Oh, okay. Main use. Okay, so I see. And how? And once again, I don't want to put you too much on the spot, Nanette, but I'm just curious. Like, who makes up the categories then? Like, how do you do you use like a reader interest classification? How do you then organize the collection if it's Dewey free? Your particular branch. Do you have like your own categories that okay, you developed, ooh, the power you have. Nice. So you developed it, okay, a very small focus collection, which I think makes complete sense, right? If you have a collection that's fairly small and you feel like you can kind of keep track, right, of this, and it's not too much additional work, and you feel like it's really meeting the needs of your users, then great. Oh, and I think that's a great point, right? I think actually, like someone was saying, right? It just, you know, what you do really needs to be focused on kind of what is best for your particular collection, the number of users you have, the number of resources you have. Yeah, no, this is great. Thank you. I always like to learn what's going on at libraries, so great. Okay. So with that said, thank you once again, those who contributed in chat. I appreciate that. So getting back to Dewey Decimal Classification specifically, just some other nuggets about this before we dive into the classification itself. It is the most widely used library of classification scheme in the world. It's regularly revised. It used to be, when it was only in print volumes, revised every like 7 to 8 years. But now they revise it more often just because it's primarily online in Webdewey, which I'll talk more about in just a moment. But it's currently owned by OCLC. If you're familiar with like WorldCat, OCLC is the owner of WorldCat. It's also the owner of Dewey Decimal, and it's copyrighted Dewey Decimal. So, and it protects its copyright, just by the way. But the development and maintenance of Dewey occurs within the DDC editorial office at the Library of Congress, strangely enough, but it's been there since the 1923. Okay, so they have many editors there for Dewey. The current unabridged edition is the 23rd, but there's also an abridged edition that's in its 15th. Okay, and Webdewey, the online version of Dewey, has both of those editions. So those who have access to Webdewey, you're welcome to use either the unabridged or abridged. I'm going to focus on the unabridged in this webinar, just FYI. But if you feel like you don't need the specificity provided by the unabridged, then abridged should be fine. I would think for vast majority of public and school libraries can just use the abridged unless you have a much larger collection. So here we go. So like I said, you go to the OCLC website to find how to subscribe to Webdewey. How much it costs, I think, just depends on the number of concurrent users that you have. So I think it might be feasible if you just want to have one person using it at a time. But I will say that they do still offer a print Dewey, but it's print on demand. Okay, so if you just don't have the money to subscribe to Webdewey, then I would highly recommend, if you can afford it, just to kind of buy the print volumes so that you can just kind of have it for many years. Obviously, it's not going to be updated as frequently as the Webdewey, but at least you'll have something. You'll have some tool that you can use to assign Dewey numbers if you're not able to have a subscription to Webdewey. So that's what I'd recommend. Also, I recommend checking out the introduction to the Dewey Decimal Classification. You can access it. This you can access for free online. There's also a link to it in Webdewey that I'll point out in a moment. But if you just want to make sure you understand the basics of Dewey, some of it, is what I've already told you. But anyway, this is a nice introduction to Dewey to kind of get into the nuts and bolts if you want to do that. Also, the Dewey editors write a regular blog on their website. This is 025.431. What is that? That's a Dewey number for what? Anybody know? Anyone can guess, maybe? Indulge me. Close, Laura. You're in the right area. Very good. Mary Kelly and Nancy get the gold stars. Yeah, it's the Dewey number for Dewey. Haha, very meta. So, oh, thank you. Yeah, thank you, Sarah. So that's I know this is kind of an older post, but if you're interested in Dewey, you want to see kind of what the Dewey editors are doing at any given time, this is kind of a nifty little blog. So thank you. Right. Okay. So let's talk Dewey. Dewey Decimal Classification is like I said, a relative location system that is hierarchical. It is hierarchical, so it moves from these broad categories, these broad disciplines, to then the more very specific topics within those disciplines. Okay, and the notation reflects this. So the numbers are not just random numbers, right? They actually reflect specific topics. Okay. So there are 10 main classes in Dewey, okay, 10 main classes represented by this first digit of the notation, okay? So it's the 600 class is technology, so represented by that first 6. Each class has 10 divisions represented by the second digit of the notation. So 610, which represents medicine and health, it's that 1 of 610 that represents medicine and health, okay? So within technology. Each division has 10 sections represented by the third digit of the notation. So 616 represents diseases, so that's second 6 representing this diseases section, right? Okay, so all Dewey numbers should be at least 3 digits, okay? You're not going to have a Dewey number that's less than 3 digits. You need to have at least 3. You can go super broad, right, by just having like 600, for example, but it's probably better to get more specific if you can. If we do want to even be more specific, then we can do that. We can, after each section, you can add a decimal point, which, by the way, if you do have a decimal point, it's always in the same spot. This is not the case for LC classification, where the decimal may move around a little bit, depending on what the class number is. But within Dewey, you'll have 3 digits, and then if you want to be more specific, you put a decimal point and then keep going, right? If you want to incorporate specific aspects of the subject, so for example, 616.3 represents diseases of the digestive system, so that 0.3 representing the digestive system specifically. Okay, so I'm keeping all this together, once again, hierarchically. This means that Dewey is a very expressive system, meaning that the notation itself expresses the extent of the relationships found among the category statements. Okay, so once again, not a bunch of random numbers. The actual notation itself kind of builds in that hierarchy of concepts. Okay, so I mean, I think we probably intuitively know this, but it's something that maybe our patrons may not understand, that we can just, we just slap just like any random number on there. But no, it's very intentional. So we keep things in order, like I said, by discipline. And we can see this also with this other example, the hierarchy for this history of boxing. And that's why it's quite critical, especially if you're using Webdewey, to pay attention to the hierarchy, which they have. They include that for each of the classification numbers you search for, where you can kind of see exactly where that topic that you're looking for fits within the hierarchy, because the full meaning of a Dewey number depends on its position in the hierarchy to which it belongs, right? So past the decimal. So this is where I really want you all to be very careful, and why I think it's very important that you're here today to hear this, in case you're not as familiar. Dewey, sorry, my screen is showing that my internet connection is a little unstable, so hopefully you're hearing me okay, and my internet's not going to give out. But I'm glad that you're here today to kind of hear this. But once again, you may already know this, but just to be clear, if you do have a policy, right, where you stop after a certain point, past the decimal point, that's fine, as long as you understand like where you need to cut off the numbers. Okay, so looking at the history of boxing, okay, so we have 796.8309. Okay, so 09 is notation representing history. Okay, so if you were, and it's 09. So if you were just, let's just say that we're gonna, not that you're saying that you're doing this specifically, Kate, but you say, look, if it has 4 digits past the decimal point, we'll just lop off that 9, right? So that we have just 3 numbers past the decimal point. Don't do that. Don't, because then you're creating a nonsensical number. There's no such thing as a 796.830. You should not, first of all, you should not have any Dewey number that ends in 0 if it has a decimal point. That's a no-no. Okay, it's a big no-no, right? So if you're going to, yes, okay, so once again, not saying that you do this, I just wanted to kind of, since you made that comment, I just wanted everyone to make sure they understand, because you did say, whoops, sorry, I got excited. You did say specifically that, max of 3 digits, right? So you know that in this case, if it's best, if you do need to reduce the number of digits here, just drop off the 09, right? Just go back up to the next, higher category at boxing, and just leave it at 796.83, right? Yeah. So please keep that in mind, especially once we get into kind of number building a little bit with table 1. It's going to be important to keep that in mind, okay? That it's fine to kind of reduce the numbers. That there's nothing inherently wrong with that. Just make sure you do it in the right spot, okay? Because these additional notations sometimes, actually, especially for table notation, oftentimes they're multiple numbers. So, okay. So thank you for letting me use your comment as an example, Kate. I appreciate it. Okay. So speaking of which, like I said, Dewey is very proud of the fact, right, that we can build number. Okay, I just saw your comment. Yeah, so you can't end in a zero. Not that it's to make sure it's clear, the zero rule is only if you have the decimal point, right? There's tons, right? There's tons of Dewey numbers that end in zero, but that's only if it's like just 3 digits. But yeah, you're not supposed to have a zero at the end if there's a decimal point. So thank you for emphasizing that. Okay. So you may not even need to do this. Once again, depending on the number of items in your collection, you may not need to build these super long numbers, but just in case you do, right? Maybe you do have a big collection where you like to add like format, like that something is a dictionary or periodical, for example, on a particular topic. If time period is emphasized, if geographic location is emphasized, right? This is all information that Dewey allows you to kind of build into the number if you want to do it. It's not required, right? But if you want to have a much more specific number to organize your collection, then Dewey allows that. It allows a lot of building in that case. So you can see here at the very bottom, I have this example of like ambulance services in Germany. Okay, so we have kind of the base number of 362.188 for just ambulance services. And then we actually use multiple tables, table 1 as well as table 2, for additional notation specific to Germany, right? To adding the fact this is ambulance services in Germany. So, but like I said, it's not required. It's just if that's something that would be useful for your collection to better organize it, then that's great. Otherwise, you may have some difficulty fitting this on your spine label if you get too long, if it gets too specific. So with that said, let's just kind of talk briefly before we move into our Webdewey portion of this about some advantages and disadvantages to Dewey. Okay, and you may already know some of these. I've already kind of mentioned some of these, but just kind of bear with me here. So first of all, because Dewey was the first classification scheme to use the concept of relative location to organize materials on the shelf, it's therefore, like I said, one of the most popular systems. It's been around the longest, so it's internationally popular. There are plenty of Dewey classifications that exist around the world, and like that other countries have kind of modified for their own uses, but it was the first, right? So it's one that you'll see most often. It has what's called quote unquote kind of pure notation, so it's all numbers, right? That's recognized internationally, unlike some other systems where they may use letters or terms that internationally they may not recognize, they may not understand. So this makes it a little bit more understandable, especially those who do not understand English, for example, right? They may recognize a particular notation that could apply across libraries without even knowing what the English name for that topic is. Like I just mentioned, it has a hierarchical notation that expresses the relationship between and among class numbers. That's really nice for keeping things in order, about keeping things together by particular topics. And then the decimal system enables an infinite expansion and subdivision. Like I just said, we can just keep adding numbers past that decimal point as long as we have more topics to include. It's really flexible in that sense. However, as I've mentioned before, there is that Anglo-American bias, okay, that the Dewey editors, I know they're working on it, but once again, because it's kind of built into the structure, unless we have all the libraries completely like reclassify their entire collections, it's a little bit difficult to modify that. So we see this in particular in like the 400 language class, literature 800 class, the 900s in history, as well as within religion in the 200s, okay? So I don't know if anyone here on the webinar has done anything local to your collection to try to minimize the bias a little bit. Maybe be able to get rid of all of it, but to help minimize that, I'd be interested to hear what you've done. But anyway, so that's just kind of there. Some related disciplines are separated, like for example, the language and literature class are separated, as well as the social science and 300 class and the 900 history, which kind of makes sense that they would go together, but they're separated in Dewey. So, which then physically means that the patron or you have to go to different parts of the library to find what you're looking for. And then some subjects are not comfortably placed. Some of you probably noticed that computer science, for example, is not like with technology or science or someplace that you would think that it would be. It's in the generalities class, the general knowledge 000 class, just because it's been added over time, right? Knowledge changes. It's changes over time, right? There's new things that are added that those when it first comes about, people may not know quite where to put it, or where, so it may not make as much sense now as it did back then, being a part of this class. So it's there, right? It's a little uncomfortably placed, but it's there just because it's a living, breathing document, right? So it just happens. In addition, once again, if you do use the 800s for literature, it sounds like many of you do, maybe not for fiction specifically, but for literature class is organized by form. So you'll have, plays together and poems together and, essays together. And if you do have someone who writes across these different forms, like Shakespeare, for example, has written, poems and plays, right? His works get classified in different places because of that. So once again, another ding for the Dewey 800s, but there you go. Though we can continue adding numbers for specificity in Dewey, there are limits in terms of accommodating subjects on the same hierarchical level, just because there can only be 9 divisions within a class, right? And 9, and then, there, but within that. But, Dewey, he did kind of, make sure it's clear that, there needed to be some wiggle room in there. And there's also ways that we can kind of move things up and down levels if we need to. So anyway, there's kind of ways around it, but it makes it a little bit awkward. Oh, and Joy, you mentioned how you use 822.33 for the Shakespeare option. Oh, interesting. Okay, yeah, good. And then there's different rates of growth in some disciplines. Some of you may have noticed, if you look closely at your Dewey collections recently, that like social science is just, there's tons of stuff in social science now in the 300 class, as well as in this technology class 600 are particularly overcrowded. And so a little uneven structure there. So if, since you can't necessarily, collect topics on every single thing that's covered in these classes, sometimes you have some interesting, very different topics right next to each other on the shelf, that you're like, okay, wait a minute, why is this one, right? Like in the 300 class in particular, there may be quite, different topics that technically are kind of, quote unquote, far away from each other number wise, but different classes, but end up kind of together on the shelf because you don't have anything on the topic that's in between, I guess, if that makes sense. So it makes it a little bit awkward, but anyway. And then finally, I've already talked about the specificity resulting in long numbers, which can be offered for shelving and on spine labels, but also altering numbers because of a new edition creates practical problems in libraries. This is ultimately kind of what Dewey was trying to prevent in this relative location system, is, having to reclassify things all the time. So he had this idea, this integrity of numbers, where he encouraged, librarians to try to keep things the same for as long as possible, even as knowledge changes and the way we label things changes, because of the practical problems of reclassification, relabeling, reshelving, and so forth, which, I think with the nature of our collections now, where there's, it's not like many libraries, if you're like a public or school library, for example, you're not keeping the same items for, 50 years, right? There's weeding happening, there's different, the collection changes over time, so you're not going to necessarily be reclassing a lot and relabeling things all the time, but Dewey just once again tried to keep this in mind, to try to kind of respect the time of the librarians not having to reclass and relabel and reshelve things all the time. Okay, good. So Joy, you mentioned how you reclassified the children's 590s when they made the major change. Okay. Okay, and I think that's a good point, right? That sometimes if you have a lot of items in a particular class number and you just don't have the time to go back and change those, you just kind of say, look, we're to keep it here for now, and then just going forward, we'll make the change for newer items that come into the collection, and then just weed as they need to be weeded at the old number. I love that. That's a good point. I guess the only recommendation, and you guys probably already know this, but just to kind of state the obvious, that if there are like topics that are a little bit more like hot button topics that, where, the idea culture has changed, their ideas on a particular topic over time, especially now. I'm just off the top of my head in terms of like the LGBTQ plus topics, right? Where in Dewey's day, that was, sexual perversion and deviation. So it was classified as such. Nowadays, we don't classify it that way. So just kind of making sure, that our patrons don't feel shocked and confused and seeing certain resources shelved in particular places that are kind of more, like I said, an old-fashioned class numbers and way of thinking. So yeah, exactly. Always exceptions, right? But like I said, we know our collections well enough where we kind of can understand where there are exceptions and where it's just kind of like a, whatever, it's not as big of a deal, right? So exactly. Okay, so thank you once again for those comments. Okay, all right, so those of you who have Webdewey, you're welcome to go ahead and get logged in if you're not already. I do believe it does log you out after a certain point, so you can just kind of log in again. Hopefully you have the authorization and password to log in to Webdewey, but yeah, you're welcome to do that now. We're not going to have the activity just immediately, but if you want to kind of follow along with me and kind of exploring Webdewey, then go ahead and log in. Which here I have a link to that I should have brought up here. I can kind of bring this up. Let's see, and put this into chat as well in case you need the login URL there. But here we go. So like I said, there's the Webdewey, which is the primary means of accessing Dewey now. So if you log in, you should see a screen that looks approximately like this. Sorry, I'm showing like a 2020 copyrighted version, but it doesn't change very radically over time. So it should, your Webdewey main screen, once you've logged in, should look approximately like this. Oh, interesting, Rebecca, about the free trial. I thought, so it's possible, and thank you for bringing this up. It's possible that they have like a different way to get the free trial, but I thought that they still had it, like a 30-day trial at least, that you may have to, yeah. For those who did have to request it and got the free trial, did you just contacted OCLC directly? There's not like a web form that you fill out, is that correct? Or you fill out a form maybe once you've already contacted OCLC? I'm just curious. It's been a while myself since I've investigated this closely. Okay. There's yeah. Okay, and that's not working, Rebecca. Yeah. Okay. All right. Yeah, so they may have to jump through a few more hoops to get there. Sorry. Okay, so I want to talk just a little bit about Webdewey, and then I think it'll be a good time just to kind of, like I said, take like a 5-minute stretch bio break here in just a moment, because I've been yakking for a while, so I want to give you all a little bit of a break. But just to kind of look a little bit around on the main screen here to see what little nuggets we have to explore. So obviously, like in the middle of the screen, we have the main search portal, right? We can just kind of type in a term, right, a subject you're looking for, a class number you're looking for, and hit search. You can see here at the top of the screen, there's also an advanced search, right? There's search, advanced search, as well as browse. I'm going to talk a little bit about the difference between search and browse in just a moment. Comments, which is, at least my understanding, this is not something that I typically use for my students, but the comments is where you, through your individual subscription, you can make like local comments on particular Dewey numbers. So let's just say that like in your library, you use this new Dewey number and not this one for a particular topic. You can kind of make a comment there that others can see, or at least that's my understanding of that. And then there's updates as well. If the Dewey provides, here's some updates to numbers, like numbers that are being discontinued or added or modified, and so on and so forth. So, and then if we kind of look down kind of mid-screen underneath the search, you can see how there's both the DDC 23, that's their unabridged Dewey that I mentioned earlier, and then the abridged 15th edition there on the right. Okay, so the DDC 23 on the left, abridged edition on the right, 15th. And they don't look all that radically different. You can kind of see that there's fewer tables under the abridged edition, but otherwise it's, like I said, there's just, I think like much less specific numbers that are provided like in the classes. So anyway, but otherwise you could see here there's a link to the manual, which I'll talk more about in just a moment. I've mentioned the introduction before. That's just the introduction to Dewey Decimal Classification that I noted earlier. A glossary of terms, which I recommend that you check out for understanding all the different terms that are there, as well as relocations and discontinuations, which I think last time I clicked on it was like maybe just like an Excel spreadsheet or something where it just has a bunch of relocations and discontinuations of numbers, which depending how into Dewey you are in terms of what you need to do for your collection might be useful to check every once in a while. So I'm not if they send out notifications of additions to that, I certainly don't receive them, so I don't know. And then underneath the Dewey services, there's also links to like the Dewey blog, and if you want to help revise the Dewey decimal, right? You have suggestions. There's a link there as well. Okay. So with that said, like I said, I highly recommend just kind of clicking around, browsing, exploring this so you can kind of get the lay of the land. But I want to first note how all of these, at least in the DDC 23, they're hyperlinked, right? All these, even like the labels here, like main classes and tables, they're hyperlinked in addition to the class numbers and tables, okay? So I'm going to click on main classes, or pretend to, like click main classes, which brings up, at least if you're following along with me, you should see a screen that looks approximately like this, right? Where it brings up the 10 main classes, starting with the 000, computer science, information and general works, to history and geography, and they've kind of grayed out a little bit those last two digits, once again, to make sure it's clear that it's that first digit that represents the main class of the notation. And once again, note how the terms here associated with each of the class numbers are hyperlinked. Okay, so we can click on each of these to browse in each of these classes. So if I click on, for example, computer science, information and general works, it brings up the divisions within each of the main classes. So that second digit of the notation, breaking this down, this is our favorite, right? The 000, because it has our library and information sciences, 020, whoop, whoop, yay. This is our favorite class, right? And all sorts of good stuff in here, all sorts of generalities here, general works and stuff. You can see here, there's even 104 that's unassigned, right? You can see that every once in a while, that sometimes, once again, for growth purposes, some numbers are just not assigned yet, or they used to be and not anymore, and so forth. So I can keep going. Let's pretend to click on manuscripts and rare books at 090, which once again brings up more stuff, right? The sections in this case. So that last digit of the notation, the third digit. So if we want to see what's here, we can see that, right? So, and this might be helpful, right? If you have a particular book, right? A particular resource you're classifying, and you're not quite sure kind of what to search, but you browse around and see kind of what's there, right? Why not? So, and you can keep going, right? You can see that still these captions are hyperlinked as well. So, okay. So this will be my last little bit, and then we'll take a break. But I just wanted to point out here, if I go back to the main screen and just type in toys, and I do a search. If I have a book that's on toys, I can just search for toys. And if you conduct a search for that, your screen maybe look a little bit different now, because I think I took the screenshot. It hasn't been like yesterday or anything like that. So, but you can see here, it takes you to a screen that has a list of Dewey numbers that have toys somehow associated with it. That's what you do that's what happens when you do a search. in Webdewey is that it just will search everywhere where there's toys in an entry. Okay, so some of these you're just like, well, some of these make sense, but others are like, huh, like why is that mentioned there? And so you do have to sometimes click through to the class, to these various class numbers to kind of see like why your topic is included there. But it's you can see here that it is organized, it's listed numerically, right? Starting, with the 000, right? Class numbers down, then, 100s, 200s, 300s, and so forth, right? Numerically ascending. So, and one thing also that you may notice when you use Webdewey, this is certainly not in the print volumes, are these fun little orange puzzle pieces that appear everywhere. This indicates what's called a quote unquote built number in Dewey. And it's, like I said, not in the print volumes. I will come back to this concept, this idea of building. These numbers are primarily ones that Webdewey kind of has built for you using kind of a base class number plus table notation. That's I think one of the great things about Webdewey, right? Because in the print volumes, you have to do all the work of building, whereas Webdewey, at least it does some of it for you. It doesn't do all the building for you, but it does do some of it, once again, represented by the orange puzzle piece, okay? All right. And then finally, just want to talk briefly about browsing, what you can do from that same page that you saw the search result list. You just have to make sure you choose the browse option. You can see here, I think I have an arrow here, making sure you choose the browse. And then also making sure in this drop-down menu, you choose the relative index, because I think it defaults to Dewey number, like browsing Dewey numbers, which is fine, you can do that. But if you want to browse a particular term, you have to make sure you do that within the relative index, ideally, unless you want to just do it once like a keyword search or something. But the relative index is really important part of Dewey, just because, like I mentioned before, it's organized by discipline. So you may have topics all over the place in Dewey in various disciplines. As it says here, the relative index arranges subject terms alphabetically and then links the terms to the disciplines in which they appear in the schedules. So for example, if I do a browse in the relative index for toys, then now the results are alphabetical by like toys, and then the specific, topic areas in which you can find toys, like advertising of toys, cataloging toys, yay, commerce, costumes, library treatment, making, collectibles, right? So then the Dewey number then on the right-hand side. So that can be useful, right? So that's why I recommend to my students all the time is that, we have these options for searching and browsing. If you're not finding what you're looking for, try different ways to do it. Try searching, try browsing, because there's more than one way to find what you're looking for. So try these different ways to explore Dewey, okay? And once again, you can see on the numbers themselves are hyperlinks, so we click on those to get to the numbers, the entries for the specific numbers themselves. Okay, Kate, you never tried the browse. Yeah, so you won't break it. So just give browse a try, but once again, just making sure that if you're browsing for a term, to make sure you choose relative index, because otherwise you're going to get some confusing results. Yeah, so good. Okay. So let's, because I want to dig deeper into this, actually go into, because this is just the search results and the browse results, right? We actually haven't gone into the entries for each of the class numbers yet, but I think this is a good time just to, like I said, take just a quick break. So I'm going to just stop sharing for now. And I have that it's like 2:42 Central. So maybe if we can come back, let's just make it an even number at like 10:50. That gives you like 8 minutes, like I said, just to get up and stretch, or now that it's like 10:43, I just changed. But 10:50, just to kind of step away, come back, and then we'll talk more. But let's do that. So is we good for those organizers? Good for 10:50? Good.
Yeah,
Okay.
that sounds good. So we'll see everybody in 7-ish minutes.
7-ish minutes. Okay. All right. Thank you all. In a moment. I have that it's 10:50 Central, so if you're still getting back, that's fine. I see that Marlene, you have a question in the chat about the comments. And my understanding is that the comments are associated with a particular account, right? So if you make comments in your Webdewey account, that only you'll be seeing that locally. Now, whether you make it visible to like just yourself or others in the institution, I think if it's just one account, then I don't know how much you can actually hide it, but to others at your institution, but yeah, it would not be something that would then be seen by all libraries. At least that's my understanding. But if there's someone here that's been using Webdewey longer and using the comments, feel free to share your thoughts. But okay, supposedly there's a way to share with the institution. So interesting. So yeah, so feel free to kind of play around with that. Like I said, I haven't done too much with the comments, so I'm not quite sure how to fully answer that question, but I think that's a great feature if you do want to use that to kind of share comments or like make note of things inside Webdewey itself. It's great. So good question. All right, so I'm going to start sharing again. See this? Okay. And so hopefully most everyone is back now. Welcome back. Hopefully you had a good break away from the computer, hopefully, but if not, so here we go. This is where I stopped last time, and now what I want us to do, if you're following along, feel free to join me in clicking on this hyperlinked 790.133. If you're not following along, it's fine. Just follow along my slides, and that's fine too. So if we click on the hyperlinked, and that's what I recommend always that you do not classify based upon the search, like the browser search result list, okay? Because this is just the browse results or the search results. Sometimes there's additional information that you need to know before you choose this particular class number, okay? So I can't emphasize that enough, is that this has been the case even when we just use the print volumes, is that I was always told, do not classify from the index, don't do it, right? You have to go to the entry within Dewey to know what to do, okay? So there you go, there's my official warning to you. So if we click on that, it's gonna bring up a screen with these various little windows there, and your screen is going to look a little bit different. Sometimes it's organized in different ways, but kind of the primary little pieces of information that I want you to pay attention to are here on my screen that I just kind of shoved together here so you can kind of see it more easily. But the organization of the screen doesn't really matter so much as what the information that's there. So first of all, on the screen, once you click on 790.133, or really any class number, is the hierarchy, right? You can see here that play with toys, this is that 790.133, is within the 700 class, arts and recreation, and then sports, games, and entertainment. It's 790 recreational and performing arts, more specifically 790, and so on and so forth. Okay, so, and that each part of this hierarchy is hyperlinked, at least the numbers are. So if you get to this point, like, oh, this is now a little bit too specific than what I want, you can always just kind of click the one above, right, to get to the more general topic. Notes is the other little area of the screen that is important to pay attention to. Sometimes there's more note information than others, depending on the class number. But for this one, it just has like these two pieces of information that, interesting, good to know, right? That this includes electric trains for some reason. Like, just wanted to make sure it's clear this included electric trains. But it also sometimes guides you elsewhere in case you got here and you're like, oh, I think this is what I want to use to assign to the resource that I have. But it says for play with a specific toy not provided for here, see the actual toy. So like flying model planes, it tells you to go somewhere a little bit different. Okay, so please pay close attention to that. There's actually quite a good bit of good instruction and information in these notes. That'll be important to make sure you choose the right class number depending on what you're classifying. And sometimes they'll have some interesting little history here of the class number, sometimes not, as well as like relative index terms, Library of Congress subject headings associated with it, right? So like I said, Webdewey is great. There's kind of a wealth of information there, sometimes depending on the class number. But once again, you pay close attention to that. Here's another number just so we can kind of see some other information you may find here. So the 391. Costume and personal appearance. We have a little bit more going on here in the hierarchy there. We'll talk more about standard subdivisions and all this other stuff in a moment. But also, you may notice, and I'll come back to this as well, is that Webdewey has this tool for creating built numbers. You can see in the top left-hand corner where it says start. This is where it allows you to kind of, it's a little tool for you to add notation based on primarily table notation. Okay, well, I guess I'll come back to that in a moment. Okay, so Nancy, you're asking about when training new classifiers, is there a correct method to guide them in determining the required number of zeros? Yeah, let's talk more about that. It's a great question. Let's talk more about that in a moment. Because it really the zeros are going to be most important when talking about the standard subdivisions, right? Like the table notations. And I guess like the super short answer to your question is that there's not, unfortunately, a quick method. There's not. I promise we're going to talk about this more. But at least as far, based upon the research I have done regarding the zeros, it is that there doesn't seem to be a consistent method of determining that. But we'll come back to that. Okay, it's good. It's a good question because it is confusing. And I wish there was a quick method to guide them, but that's Dewey in all of its, very logicalness can be very illogical in many ways, in my opinion, in that sense. Okay, so yeah, so I'll come back to that because you probably notice, right, in looking at the hierarchy that there's a differing number of zeros here. So it just kind of depends on where you are in the classification. But I also wanted to point out, so here we have a lot more going on in the notes, right? So in addition to kind of what we talked about with like the toy entry, where it kind of guides you to like for fashion design, see, 746.92, and then, a hyperlinked number for you to click on and so forth. I also wanted to point out this, that some, not all, but some entries have this, link to what's called the manual. Okay, the manual. This is important, important document in Dewey. LC kind of has a similar document, like for LC classification, like the classification shelf listing manual. So this is kind of a similar document, but not quite. So first of all, the manual gives advice on classifying in difficult areas, but it's not exhaustive. So you're not going to find advice on classifying for every single class number, okay? But it has quite a few, as well as advice for like table notation as well. It is arranged by Dewey number, and then there's often references to the manual within the schedules and tables, so you know that it exists, right? Because otherwise, how would you know it exists unless you just look, right? So it is quite helpful having the entries, a little blurb there saying there's a manual entry relating to this class number, go there, okay? And then it has further information about a specific number or a range of numbers or a choice among numbers, okay? So for example, at that entry that I was just at 391, it says this, okay? This is the manual entry for that, for like 391 versus 646.3 and 646.92. So whether, deciding what you have relates to costume or clothing, okay? So it does say here, for example, use 391 for clothing customs, such as what was worn, what is now fashionable, national costumes, e.g. Edwardian fashion, which is this mega long number, right? This long, lovely number that has lots of nines and zeros that may be a little bit too much for your spine labels. But you could, right? If you want something for Edwardian fashion, bam, there you go. There's your lovely number. But it does say, use 646.3, for example, for home economics aspects of clothing, such as how to dress on a limited budget, select the best quality of clothing, dress correctly for the business world, etc. And then 746.92 for artistic aspects of clothing, right? So just clothing considered for as a product of the textile arts and fashion design. And what I like about the manual entry as well is, in addition to having some guidance on what to choose, like it also often has this if in doubt, right? You're like, I have, I have something that seems to cover all of this or part of it. I don't really quite know what to do. It says, if in doubt, prefer in the following order. So if you don't know what you have and kind of what fits perfectly, just go with 391, essentially is what it says. Okay, prefer 391 first, and then the 746, and then the 646. Okay, so once again, please remember that whenever you are struggling to determine what Dewey number to assign. There's confusion. Okay. You can also access, in addition to the manual entries at each classification number, there's also just a direct link, right, on this main page. Just click on the manual, and you can see, once again, it's organized, right, by Dewey number. The tables come first, I believe. Okay. So with that said, let's practice. Okay, so if you have not logged into Dewey, the Webdewey, please do so now. And if you don't have Webdewey, then I'd recommend maybe just kind of searching your catalog or maybe someone else's catalog to see if you can find the Dewey number associated with each of these topics. Okay, so find the Dewey number. For those who have Webdewey, though, I want you to either search or browse, or both, right? Practice both. And I know some of you may have memorized these, it's like in your brain, but just try to set that aside. Just search for it anyway in Webdewey, or if you don't have Webdewey, try to find it in your library catalog. So Halley's Comet, Ouija board and spiritualism, and dinosaurs. So fairly basic-ish items. Okay, so I'm going to give you a couple minutes. Hold your answers, maybe just write them down either on your computer or a piece of paper. Don't post in chat yet, and then we'll talk as a group. Okay, I'm going to give you a few minutes to do this. And if you do have any issues with like Webdewey, trying to find things, just post in chat and I can try to assist. I'll be quiet for the time being. Okay, so how's everybody doing? Are you finding things, even if you're not done? Are you finding some of these? All of them? Anybody having difficulty locating these? Okay, you're finding, okay, thank you. So far so good. And it's okay if you're having difficulty, there's no shame in admitting it. That's why we're here. We're here to learn, learning together, learning safe space. So don't feel afraid if you're struggling to say so. Thank you. Awesome. And good to see you, Adam. You're getting a lot of me this semester. Adam's in my advanced cataloging class. You're gonna get more. You're gonna get this and more later on this semester. Lucky you. Lucky you. Okay. All right. Him has already got, everybody's just super excited. Okay, so let's okay, so good. So everybody's got some, so let's start with let's just hopefully everybody's at least got the Halley's Comet one. So okay, so we have a 523.6 and then kind of, I guess, a /42 for Halley's Comet, but is that what y'all are getting as well? So here I'm gonna think that's what I have. Yeah, 523.642. And I think that /, by the way, that's not something that you would necessarily include in the Dewey number. That's just, I think, kind of to break things up a little bit to show that you can kind of then maybe lop off that if necessary. But like the full one would be 523.642, which I just added to my slide now, just in case you missed it. Okay, so for that one, just like, I think just searching or browsing for Halley's Comet, making sure you spell it correctly, should take you directly to it, I think. So, but you can also just kind of search more broadly for comets and probably get there as well if you want to do that. But did you all find the Ouija board one? What did you guys get? Okay. No, you're good. No, you're good. You didn't make a mistake. You're good. Okay, so we have some slightly different numbers here. What did I get? Let's see. This is what I have. 133.9325. So that's the Ouija boards within spiritualism. So, I mean, if it was a Mary Kelly, I said that yours is a little bit broader, I guess, which is, I don't even, let's see. 130, what is 133.9? Is that, I'm gonna browse, 133, 0.9. Okay, which is just spiritualism, but yeah, so 133.9 spiritualism. And then what was my answer? Right, I'm confusing myself now. Is 133.9325, which 93. So within psychic messages, specific methods, and then Ouija board is under a specific method of psychic messages. Yeah. So you might be in your library, you might not need that all those numbers, but that is the most specific one for Ouija board within spiritualism. Very good. Okay, then Sarah, you have divinatory, is that how you say, divinatory arts, which I guess, like, so what, 133.3, huh? Huh. Because that's also, well, I guess you could maybe use that. Symbolic divination, 133, I don't know. Because I'm not seeing, unless I'm completely missing it, I'm not seeing Ouija boards necessarily at that, but I don't know enough about the
Karen,
divinatory arts. Yeah, go ahead.
Karen, that wasn't my answer. I was responding to a question in the chat. Someone had
Oh,
asked
sorry.
what 133.3 was, and I just
Oh,
responded. That's all.
thank you, Sarah. Sorry. No, not, yeah, thank you for clarifying. So, okay. And then next one, dinosaurs. So I know someone mentioned that how is the best way to, because best way to search for dinosaurs is it's not like it's labeled, the caption is not dinosaurs, right? So what did everybody get for dinosaurs? Okay. Okay, so a lot, a lot of the same. That's what I got as well. 567.9. So for that one, I think if you just do like a search or browse for dinosaurs, and then it comes up with, what does it come up with? Let's see. It's like the scientific term. Whoops. I can't spell. I'm trying to type right now and I can't spell. Yeah, reptilia. And Rebecca, I want to come back to that. That's a good spot, right? That this is a dinosaur dictionary. It is. So I want to talk more about that because we can do more. We can do more with that. But right, so for this one at 567.9 reptilia, and then if you look, if you click on that 567.9 reptilia in the notes, it says class here Archosauria, Diapsida, I guess, and dinosaurs. Okay, good. So, and that's Gail, that's fine. If you all got the 567.903, you done good. Because that's also correct. That's more specific. So, yeah. But I guess, yeah, so the general topic, if it's, just kind of a general work on dinosaurs that's not necessarily like a dictionary or encyclopedia, it would just be, 567.9. Good. So does that, sorry, I'm just going back up to, sorry, whoever asked about finding, yeah, I think it was Kate, the best way to search dinosaurs. And I wonder if, let's see, if I browse dinosaurs, if that's easier. Yeah, I think just honestly, like browsing the relative index for dinosaurs gets you there probably the quickest. Just because if you browse in the relative index for dinosaurs, it just comes up dinosaurs and then 567.9. Whereas the other one, if you do a search, it comes up with like reptilia as the kind of the first main answer, and then you have to figure that one out if you don't know. That's what you know, but yeah, what reptilia encompasses. So yeah, I think, yeah, I mean, so not being an expert in reptilia, I don't know what Archaeosauria and Diapsida, I just assume that those would be type of dinosaurs, but maybe they're not, since they're not included as a dinosaur. Yeah. Who knows? Anyway, thank you for indulging me here. So well done. Well done. Okay. So any questions about that? There are some people who mentioned, kind of what better ways for like searching and browsing and so forth. But what did you all think about that with searching? If you haven't searched Webdewey before, was that fairly painless or, oh, the fancy names, Gail. Yeah. Yeah. They can be kind of tricky. Yeah. Especially getting into like the animals, like in the zoology, it's just, like, why? Come on, give us the popular names. Okay. All right. All right. So feel free to post in chat if you do have any questions about the searching and browsing and Webdewey. But let's move on, because I also want to get to, some of you all mentioned like the additional notation, right, for the dictionary aspect. So I want to make sure we talk about that. So I'm just going to go to this number for cleaning clothes at home. 648.1. Feel free to join me there if you want. You can just search for that number directly to get there, or browse to it, whatever you want to do. But when you do go there to the 648.1, there's all sorts of good stuff here, right? So, but I wanted to point out specifically this. Okay, so this in the notes, they have this note, right, saying standard subdivisions are added for laundering and related operations together, or for laundering alone. Okay, so standard subdivisions are essentially table 1 notation. Okay, it's table notation, so it's not going to say that. It's not going to say table 1, right? It's the standard subdivisions. So it's saying that if you do get this, you need to make sure that if you are going to add table notations, then you do it for a resource that's about laundering and related operations together, or just laundering alone. You can't add like table 1 standard subdivisions to a work on just related operations, whatever that means. Okay, so once again, this kind of illustrates the importance of the notes in Dewey, is that if you do want to continue building more specific numbers, then you have to pay close attention to those notes and not just assume things based upon the search results. Okay, so let's try delving into this a little bit deeper. Okay, there is different ways that we can build. Okay, so it's just kind of assumed that in Dewey that you build, right? If you want to have a more specific number, it's like, you know, like Lego blocks, right? If you want to have a magnificent Lego creation, you have to build. So same thing with Dewey. You can start with just kind of the basics from the schedule text, but if we want greater specificity, we often have to build. Now we can do that from tables instructions within the Dewey schedule text itself. Okay, we don't have to use the tables all the time. There's ways of building other ways of building in other ways. Which once again, due to time restrictions, and also quite frankly, I think that in most libraries you don't need to build from what it says in the schedule text in most cases, but anyway, that can be for a different webinar. But most commonly you use these separate tables 1 through 6 for building purposes. In fact, sometimes you can't get away from it. I mean, I will say, and like to go back to the 800 literature class, for example, those numbers are primarily just numbers, like even just like the first 3 digits are just primarily built using tables. All right, I mean, so it's kind of hard to get away from it, but in other areas you can, right? You can obviously get away from it. So one important thing to keep in mind with table notation is you never can use it alone, even though you're going to see it pop up and like search results lists. You can't just use that by itself. You always have to attach it to the end of a class number from the schedules as instructed. Okay, but it's not required, as I mentioned earlier. You'll always know if notation is table notation because it'll have that long hyphen or double dash in front of it. So like 81 represents Brazil, but it has the dash dash. And then, you know, 21st century is 0905 with a dash dash in front of it and so forth. Okay, so whenever you see that, note that that is table notation. Okay, we can go to the tables directly from the main search screen by going here. Okay, we can either just click on that word tables to kind of bring up all the tables, or at least the main tables, or we can go to a table directly by clicking on like T1 for table 1, T2 for table 2, and so forth. Okay, note how table 3 itself is not, there's nothing in table 3. Right, you actually have to use the subtables A, B, and C, but that's for the literature class, not going there today. So the main tables that you'll likely encounter for like notation is usually like table 1 or table 2, because this contains kind of the basic stuff. So the standard subdivisions in table 1, and also geographic areas, historical periods in table 2. So that's fairly common. But you can see here there's other ones you could use as well, depending on the topic. In fact, for some of these tables, it really is like for just, like I said, like the table 3 and the subtables are really just for literature class primarily. There may be some other random class numbers that you might use it with, but otherwise it's just for the 800 class that you would use it. Okay, so they're pretty specialized. So I would just recommend that if you do have your classifying resources that fall into one of these categories, kind of to explore these on your own to see what you need to do, or buy my book if you want, because I go into more detail about the tables there and when you would use them if you're curious. But otherwise, I'm just for now, to keep things fairly simple, straightforward, we'll stick to table 1. Okay, table 1, the standard subdivisions. Okay, so if you click on table 1, it'll bring up this, right? Note how, once again, oh, Mary Kelly, thank you. Thank you. You're so lovely. Thank you, thank you. Found it on Amazon, did ya? Yeah, thank you. So table 1, the standard subdivisions, note how, once again, it begins with like a T1, not that you would add T1 to your class number, but that's just to indicate this is from table 1. And then a note, once again, the dash dash, right, the long hyphen, and then all of these standard subdivisions begin with a 0. So either like 0, 1, 0, 2, 0, 3, 0, 4, and so forth. Okay, so always a 0. Now, as Nancy was saying at the beginning, sometimes the 0, there's some differences here depending on the class number. So I'll try to hit some of these, but like I said, it's just, I wish it was more consistent. Let's put it that way. So note how each of these notations are hyperlinked, right? So you can click on each of these to have it expand out further, give further information for each of the standard subdivisions, okay? So for example, you may be wondering miscellany. What's there? It's miscellany. What is all is there? So if we click on 02, for example, it brings up a list of all the miscellany that's in 02. And note how, once again, each of these are hyperlinked, so we can keep digging further, deeper into the hierarchy within miscellany. But yeah, so here we have, like, you can add the fact that something is like an outline or synopsis of the topic, or a humorous treatment of a particular topic, or an audio-visual treatment of a topic. And you just take that notation and tack it onto the class number that represents the topic for that, right? So an audio-visual treatment of dinosaurs, right? A book on dinosaurs, an audio-visual treatment, then we take the class number for dinosaurs and tack on 0208. Okay, so I'll show you more about that in just a moment. But I do highly recommend just kind of browsing around the standard subdivisions just so you know what's there, because sometimes it's not obvious what's there until you actually browse around. So you want to take that, like I said just a second ago, we want to take the standard subdivision, so that table 1 notation, and place it at the end of the Dewey number for the topic that you've chosen, right? So that's the first step, is, okay, what is the main topic of the resource you're cataloging? Find that first, find that class number, and then you tack on the standard subdivision. Just make sure you follow the instructions at that Dewey number, class number that you found, because sometimes you're not allowed to include a standard subdivision, or you need to do something additional, or the subdivision's already built into the class number, right? So there's certain class numbers where it says, like, you don't need to add anything here because it's already built in to the number in the schedule text, okay? So that's why it's so critical to pay close attention to, to those notes in the class number hierarchy within the schedules. Okay, so let me go back for just a second. So Marlene, you're asking if you can just use 02. You could, I guess. Yeah, I mean, so if you just have a work that's on just miscellany of a particular topic, you could, but I mean, note how miscellany we're talking about here. Like, there's like a lot of miscellany here. So that you could, but that would be pretty broad in terms, I mean, it's really, I'm not really saying too much, I guess, because it's saying too much if you put just 02. Yeah, that's a good question. Yeah. So that's just, so in answer to Sarah's question about the 0 after the decimal point, that is just a signifier for of a table notation, or at least a table 1 notation, because not all table notation will necessarily begin with a 0, but this is a way of signifying that this is table 1 notation. Yeah. As for like any, like the deep philosophical reasons for this, I couldn't tell you, but that's just kind of their way of signifying this is table 1 notation. But I think some of the other tables, yeah, may have a 0 there as well, but yeah. Does that help, Sarah? Hopefully, yeah. Yeah, and Joy, good point. Like, how longer? Yeah, exactly. So getting back to Marlene's point about, okay, well, can I just put 02? You could, right? Especially if you have limitations on how many numbers you can add past the decimal point. But it's really not really saying too. I mean, in my mind, like, you might as well just not even include it if you just have a 02, because it's not very specific. So, so Sarah, yes, it does matter. It does matter. Thank you for saying that, for asking. It does matter. Yes. Because then, yeah, this is part of the table notation, is the 0. Yeah. And in fact, sometimes we have to add an additional 0 depending on where we are in the schedule text. There are certain areas where you have to, for standard subdivisions, you have to add an additional 0. Yeah. But I do remember that there are a few places where you don't add a 0, but that's why that's once again back to Nancy's point, is that it just really depends. I hate to keep saying that, I sound like a broken record, but it just kind of depends on where you are in the schedule text in terms of how many zeros you have. But it's just kind of a general rule of thumb. A table 1 notation will start with a 0. It just does. Yeah. Yeah. It was great. Thank you. Thank you for these questions. They're important questions. And right, so yeah, so and Marlene, yeah, getting too long. So yeah, you have to think about that. Yeah. And then also finally, you cannot include 2 standard subdivisions unless special permission is given. Okay, so I do talk about this in my book a bit, where what is it called? Like, so it's rare. I mean, typically you don't add 2 standard subdivisions, right? You just kind of choose one, kind of whatever the prominent one is, or you use what's called a table of preference to decide. But sometimes Dewey provides this special notation that's it's table 1 notation is what it is, but they just call it something else. So you can add special notation to something else. But anyway, just general rule, don't include 2 standard subdivisions. So if you have like an illustrated dictionary, right, because illustrations can be one standard subdivision and dictionary can be another, you'd have to choose between those. You can't use both. So let's go back to our good friend, Dinosaur Dictionary, shall we? So some of you have already come up with an answer to this. So you already know the answer, but let's actually show how this is done, how it's actually built. So first of all, as we talked about, we find the class number for dinosaurs, which is Reptilia. Here, once again, in the notes, like I mentioned, dinosaurs is included within this 567.9, right? Also, I want to point out, and you probably saw this if you looked at the Reptilia entry, is then the hierarchy, you can see how some already here, like, right? So like Marlene, you mentioned just having this as 0, 2. So here they have one built for us. But this, in this case, for reptiles, paleozoology, miscellany, right? So yes, so clearly we can do that. And that's fine. So that's already built for you. So yay, we don't have to worry. But they also have one for like dinosaurs encyclopedias built for us. And then here, Dinosaurs Australia. Sometimes it seems kind of random, kind of like what's already built for you and what's not, but whatever. And that's what that orange puzzle piece means. So if we go back here and just kind of once again emphasize here, we have 567.9 for dinosaurs. If we look on table 1, we can see that 03 is the notation representing dictionaries, encyclopedias, and concordances. So we take that 03, because dictionaries are included as part of this, and we add that, not literally, not addition together, but place at the end the 03 to make it clear that this is a dinosaur dictionary. Okay, so all the dinosaur dictionaries should then, and the encyclopedias will all be together on the shelf under this one class number, and then ideally organized by the author alphabetically. Okay. So it's really as simple as that, right? Just making sure we include the 0, unless in the schedules it says to not do so. Okay. So I think I have, may have some examples here in a minute, but just wanted to point out, you know, in Webdewey, like I just showed you with the dinosaurs, is that sometimes built numbers are provided for you. So they've already done the work, yay. So here's same thing if we go to wine, 641.22, we have one for like wine festivals and collecting and awards and so forth. And another feature of Webdewey that I don't know if you've used it successfully, great, but I find it somewhat hit or miss, is this feature here, this little tool for creating a built number. That's what that's for. So if you click on start, for example, it'll kind of walk you through. You're like, okay, so you have wine. Okay, you want to build a number for collecting wine. Okay, here's table 1 notation, choose that. And then it just kind of builds it for you. Okay, but I honestly, like, I've used it a few times, and it's worked okay, except for a few times when it's actually been wrong. So when it's you know, so I'm like, okay, so just at your own risk, right? You may just want to double check there, but otherwise it's kind of nifty. Okay, so, and I'll come back to the more zeros here in just a moment. Some other things to consider, but in terms of just kind of some basic instructions for the zeros, okay? Unless other instructions are given, the terminal zeros in a main class or division number should be dropped before adding a standard subdivision, okay? So for example, if I have a resource that's a journal, right, a magazine on mathematics, a serial publication. So mathematics, we would start with mathematics, right? That's our base class number, and we want to tack on from table 1 the notation for journals, for serial publications, which is 05. So since mathematics ends with 0, you don't add another 0. You just have the 1 0, which I guess could just be the one from mathematics, 510, and then put 0.5. Okay, so unless other instructions are given, which I'll explain more in just a minute, but you need to drop the last 0 in that class or division number before placing the standard subdivision. Same thing here, if we have, in this case, like an encyclopedia of philosophy. So philosophy being pretty broad, right? It's a global class of 100. It's actually 103 is the class number we would have for that, and not 100.03. So in that case, you know, dropping 2 zeros in this case. So dropping the 2 zeros at the end of philosophy and then placing the 03. Okay. Once again, unless it tells you otherwise. So for example, at physics, it says here within the hierarchy that the standard subdivisions, remember the table 1 notation, is for here. So it actually, you don't drop the terminal 0 in 530 in physics. You just tack on the standard subdivisions after the decimal point. Once again, getting back to, I know, Nancy, I like to keep returning to you because you ask good questions. It's just, once again, I've never seen anything that actually explains precisely why here, except there are some instances where they've decided to add additional, like have notation for specific topics here that would then conflict with the standard subdivisions if we did this according to that last slide, right? Dropping the terminal zeros. So for example, in physics, they have, like, you know, states of matter at 530.4 and instrumentation at 530.7. So if we were to drop a 0 there, then the standard subdivisions might conflict, right? It would be the same as what we would have for these more specific topics. Okay, so that's, but you know, how the topics are chosen in this regard, I'm not entirely certain. So yeah. So I'm seeing, Gail, you have a question about the built. Oh, yeah, have these been approved by the cataloging powers that be? Like, whoever those people are, the Dewey editors or the power players, the PCC or something, right? So that's a great question. I just assumed that if they're there with the puzzle pieces, those are like approved essentially by the Dewey editors, that they wouldn't, yeah. So I think that you're safe. If you see the ones with the puzzle pieces, unless it conflicts drastically with what you have normally in your collection, I think that you're pretty safe to just grab what's there. Yeah. Yeah. Yeah, I just assume that's the Dewey editors that do that. Good question. Okay. So I have another little fun activity for you all. Getting close to being done here. So let's do this, okay? So hopefully you're still in Webdewey. If not, please log in again. What I have here are 3 different resources. I have an illustrated book about zodiac signs, a serial publication on the topic of descriptive cataloging, fascinating, love that one, and then research on geese, but geese within animal husbandry. So what I want you all to do first is within Webdewey, find these topics that are in bold. Okay, find the class number associated with those topics in bold. And then I want you to, and then make note of any notes it may have about standard subdivisions at each of those. And then I want you to find the table 1 notation that in this case I have underlined in each of these descriptions. Okay, and then just build a class number for each of these resources. Okay, all right, so, and then for those, once again, who don't have Webdewey, if you can just maybe try to find the topics at least in your catalog or elsewhere, and then we can talk about the table 1 notation when you're done. Okay, so I'm going to give you all a few minutes to do this, and then we'll come back and talk as a group. Okay. You just give like 1 more minute and then we'll discuss 1 more minute. If you're not able to get through all of it, it's fine. Just 1 more minute and we'll talk. Okay, y'all. Were you able to get through at least the first 2 or all of them? Yeah, and thank you, Rebecca, for your reassurance, right? And let me make it clear. So I agree with Rebecca that it's, for the most part, it's, especially the puzzle piece ones, you're safe. You're safe. It's not incorrect. I was just like that other, like that tool, that other building feature. Like I said, sometimes like I find like the zeros, right? Sometimes at certain class numbers, you need like an additional 0 or something. Like sometimes that it's not always accurate in terms of that particular tool. So you just have to kind of double check on that, but it's not like it's going to be radically wrong or anything like that. It's not going to give you a completely different class number if you're classifying in one topic and it goes into a completely different topic. So you should be safe. Okay, so let's go ahead and look at the first one. So the illustrated book about zodiac signs. So first of all, did you find zodiac signs? And then did you find the table 1 notation for like illustrations? Anyone want to give me what they have for their answer for this one? If you're brave enough to, yeah, go ahead. Yeah, Sarah, go ahead. Or Adam, whoever. Yeah, just put your answer in the chat if you want to share. Kale, I like your examples. Oh, lovely. Okay. So it looks like most of you all have, the same or very similar answers. So here we go. So this is what I have. So zodiac signs I found at 133.52. And then from what I remember from that entry is that we don't need to do anything, with like the zeros. So we don't need to add a 0 or remove a 0. So we can just then take illustrations from table 1, which is 022 or 0222, right? I think it gets pretty specific on this. Like you can get, let's see, what did it, 0. So but by the way, which is under miscellany. If you were having difficulty finding illustrations, it's under miscellany. And then if you keep clicking on the 022, then you can get like pictures and related illustrations at 0222. So if you have that 0222, that's also correct. So sorry, just seeing the wombat poop wine. Oh, yummy. Seeing that. Thank you for that lovely visual, Gail. I appreciate that. Anyway, so it looks like most of you all did get that. There may be like a missing 1 0 or something, but otherwise, yeah, you all did great on this one. Perfect. Okay, so any questions about this one? And by the way, if you did have difficulty finding illustrations because it was buried under miscellany, remember that you can search and browse for table notation as well. So if you do, I think, let's see, if I did like a search for like illustrations in Webdewey, yeah, that's one of the first results you get. If a search for illustrations brings up the table notation, there's actually quite a few table notations it brings up. It at least guides you towards the right area. So well done. What about this next one? So you all found descriptive cataloging, and then what is the notation for serial publications? Okay, you guys are rocking this. Nice. Okay. So for this one, let's see. That's what I have. Looks like, Adam, you have an additional 2 there. Maybe, let's see. 025, which may not, well, let's see. So 025322, what's that? 025. Okay. 3. So I'm just trying to see if maybe that is, well, because that's your choice and form of access points, I think. You have the little additional, so it really should be at 025.32 is specifically for descriptive cataloging more generally, but you're good. That's close. And then I have 05 for serial publications in table 1. Once again, there's not any notes there that says you can't use table 1 notation, standard subdivision, so we're good here. Yeah, well done. Well done. And then finally, I wanted you to find geese within animal husbandry, because as we talked about, sometimes animals can be all over the place in Dewey, like in zoology. So find geese within animal husbandry, good. Feel free to post what your answer is. So we have some slight differences here, but nothing radical. And then finding research within table 1, which that was also a little tricky. Because that one, I believe, is also, where is that? It's it's under education, research, and related topics, 07. And some of you all, so good. So you can either do 07, but there is actually one 072 that's specifically for research. You can get even more specific. If you click on research, they have entries for like research methods and historical research and descriptive research and all sorts of different types of research if you want to go there. But this is probably general enough, 072, or yeah, some of you all just had like 07, which if you're trying to keep your numbers short, 07 is probably sufficient. So yeah. Okay. Questions about, you all did great on this. Well done. Any questions about number building using table 1? Just the basics, right? There's a lot more to it, obviously, but that's the basics for table 1. Okay. Well, did great. Okay. Well, feel free to keep posting questions. I'll keep moving on because we're just having so much fun. Time is flying. So I just wanted just to briefly, just to once again kind of get into like a specific genre of resources, which are biographies, which I think a lot of libraries just do so differently, quite frankly. I think it's really fascinating to see, like whenever I go to my local library's catalog and we use like Swan, and like you can see what all the libraries, like all the libraries that have like a particular book you're looking for or something. And I like to look at the call numbers, right, that they've assigned. And it seems like there's sometimes like they're just so different, right? That each library does something a little different. This is definitely one of those areas where there's quite a few differences. Sometimes you just kind of like put biographies, like autobiographies, memoirs, just all in the same area. But, Dewey does allow for classifying for biographies, but it gives us various options. Okay, so it does say we can just use like the 920, and feel free to post in chat if you have a specific, policy for this. But some libraries just use the general like 920, some use just like B or bio and just don't even worry about the Dewey numbers. But otherwise, if we just kind of just do straight up what Dewey tells us to do, just the main instruction for this, if you have an individual biography, it says to class that biography according to the subject's most noted contribution, and then adding 092 from table 1. So if we just go with kind of the general instruction in Dewey for classifying biographies, they're going to be all over the place, in other words, because we're going to put the biographies in the subject area, essentially, of the person the biography is about. Okay, so just as an example, since I'm reading this right now, so it's on my mind, which is great, by the way, this Patrick Stewart, making it so a memoir. It's really fun. So I thought, okay, might as well just use that. So he is actually, because I looked around at what some libraries are doing, and they're choosing 791.4 for this one. So even though he was famous for the stage, but he's also super famous for like Star Trek: The Next Generation, like TV shows and movies. And so therefore, we can place him like 791.4, or maybe, if we think television is kind of his most noted contribution, 791.45. And then, according to Dewey, we want to take that number, whichever one we choose, and then use table 1. Sorry, this is kind of a little much right here, but it says here, if we look at the table 1092 for our biography, it gives a lot of instructions here, including the ones that I just mentioned before in terms of the very bottom of the screen here. You can see like option A and option B and option C, right? But, it does say here, class here treatment of individuals, right? Is kind of the general instruction here. Is a bunch of other stuff, because there's always exceptions. That's one thing with Dewey, is that even though it does give us a lot of great instruction, it seems like there's tons of exceptions to all the rules as well. Because it says here, for example, like, we don't want to use this 092 for a person whose name is used in the schedule heading. So like Muhammad the Prophet, for example. So you do have to pay close attention, to different areas of Dewey to make sure that you're doing this correctly. But going back to this, what I've done is 794.1, then placing 092 from table 1 to show this is an individual biography to the end. And there you go, right? And so that's what you would do to keep all the, I guess in this case, this motion picture, radio, television, podcasting people together on the shelf, kind of, I guess, towards the end of the class run. So Joy, you use 791.092 for entertainers. Interesting. Yeah, exactly, because that's what I think is also really confusing about this. What about people who have, you know, so many different contributions from different areas and so forth? So Dewey does say that you want to, sometimes you just have to make a judgment call, right? You can either just decide, this is where I'm going to put them, this is what I consider to be the most noted contribution, or just whatever class number that seems to fit the best generally for that person. So because it does say in the manual entry for 092 table entry is that if a person made approximately equal contributions to a number of fields, use the number for the subject that provides the best common denominator. So giving some extra consideration to the person's occupation. Okay, so focusing primarily on the occupation. So so that's why, you know, sometimes it's kind of difficult, right? You do have to make a judgment call. So anyway, so I just wanted to point that out because I did see so many different ways to do this. And if you don't, right, if your class number for this book is not exactly this, don't worry, because it's not like there's a Dewey police that's going to come break down your door and arrest you for doing something different. That's not the point, as we talked about at the beginning. You do what's best for your patrons, right? Whatever kind of makes the most sense for them to find what they're looking for. So and Marlene mentioned it could be class in the subject area when the book emphasizes the work, and then, but if it's a comprehensive on their whole life, yeah, go with biography. No, that's good. Yeah, so this one, interesting. Even though it says it's a memoir, this does seem to cover his entire life, so that makes it interesting, because memoir tends to maybe focus on specific areas. But anyway, well, good, a lot of consensus here. So anyway, so I just wanted to kind of point that out, and just in the time we have left, because I want to have some time for questions, I just have a few like tips and tricks that you probably already know, but just in case you don't, even if you have access to Webdewey, I highly recommend always checking your library and other libraries, that how they have classed, or your library has classed a resource or a similar resource on the topic, so you make sure that the resources on a similar topic stay together. But just look what other libraries have done. If you're like, I just have no idea, look at what others have done, okay? And if you can't find anyone else then that has that particular resource, then try to find a similar resource on a similar topic and try to go with that. So this is what I was talking about before. This is like the list of libraries that has the Patrick Stewart memoir and the many different call numbers that we see. I mean, some of them are very similar, but it's just kind of a little all over the place in terms of where I'm seeing how people are doing it, which is great, right? I mean, there's nothing wrong with a little difference here, but I just found it really interesting to see the differences there. So nothing wrong with kind of copying what other people are doing. Also, and this may not be as helpful if this isn't there, or you have copy cataloging, so it kind of gives you the information anyway, is that Library of Congress cataloging and publication data, the CIP, that's on the back side of the title page, okay, the title page verso, that especially for nonfiction works, right, for fiction, it's going to be just going to give you some really general stuff that's not going to be helpful necessarily, but for nonfiction, if there is the CIP information here, the Dewey number, it also has an LC, but Dewey numbers would also be included here, along with the Dewey edition number. So DC 23 being the 23rd edition of Dewey, that will help guide you. So just, that's what LC or whoever created the CIP came up with, just go with that, right? Just, if they've done the work for you, take it, take that work, go with it. So once again, this is the cataloging and publication data on the title page verso the backside of the title page. And then finally, if you haven't checked this out, I wish that I could say something further about other kind of free resources to find Dewey beyond Webdewey. But the only other one that was useful, that was free, is since been shut down, which is OCLC's Classify. I don't know if you've heard of that, but OCLC decided to discontinue that at the end of January, which is just kind of broke my heart because it was, I think there's so many catalogers that use that for classification purposes that just didn't have access to Webdewey. So sorry that I can't recommend that anymore. But if you are still struggling, Library Thing, this kind of online, cataloging, social cataloging site, has what's called the Melville Decimal System, where you can kind of go. It starts with just kind of the broad main class numbers at the very top there, like 0, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9. And you kind of keep clicking down to each of these. And it shows you kind of the general, areas here, like, the divisions, the sections, and so forth, in various books that have been assigned that class number. And this is just based upon, at least my understanding of this, is they developed this based upon what libraries have assigned. So they're not able to, they're able to say, no, we're not using this copyrighted Dewey. We're just taking what other people have assigned in their catalog and then creating this based upon that. So kind of more publicly available data. So once again, it may not be as precise as you may want or need, but at least gets you in the right direction, right general area. And this is free. Most importantly, this is free if you can't, if you don't have access to Webdewey. So it's kind of fun too. It's kind of pretty, color-coded, right? So anywho, so give that a try. Just kind of play around with it and see if that would be useful. So that's what I have. I was hoping for, sorry, a little bit more time for questions, but and yes, thank you, Nancy. I was just saying, in my book, I mentioned some additional sources if you want kind of more formal education in Dewey. Dewey has some training courses. I think there, what was it? There's obviously Nancy provides some excellent education in Dewey as well. I know that you offered a Dewey course not too long ago, Nancy, like last year or something. Is it, yeah, through Rails, and also Library Thing has a course you can you can take as well. But anywho, there's other places you can access Dewey learning materials as well if you need additional education and training. So questions in like the 2 minutes we have remaining, thoughts, concerns? Okay, I see what you're saying. Oh, my books. Okay, I'll get to yours in just a moment, Nancy. I'll explain, because that goes into a little bit more depth that I was planning to go to in this course. So if you can stick around, we can talk about that. But here, I'm going to show my books again. 1 second. Let me share this. If I can find the share again. There we go. Share screen. Share. Okay. So Hema, here we go. This is the one that just came out really now, is the Practical Guide to Dewey Decimal Classification. And then I also wrote a Practical Guide to Library of Congress Classification and a Practical Guide to Library of Congress subject headings. So if you're interested. So this is another great way to learn a little bit more about these standards. Because like I said, for all my books, I try to keep it fairly straightforward. A lot of exercises to complete with the answers at the end, things like that. So, okay. All right, any further kind of thoughts or questions do you have? And we can talk in a second and see. Okay, good, Kate. Yay. Yay. Thank you. Okay, and like I said, I'm gonna send my PowerPoint slides to Sarah, who will then pass my slides. So if you want my slides, you will get them. So, all right. Okay, thank you so much for coming and sticking with me through all this. This is not always the most exciting thing, but I'm hoping it was helpful. And if you do have any further questions, just email me. I'm happy to talk further. Okay.
Awesome. Thank you, Dr. Snow, and thank you everybody for attending. We will send out the recordings and the slides, like Dr. Snow said. It is also, we put our past programs up on the Laconia website as well. So I'm gonna throw that in the chat. And again, please join us if you're interested in planning. You can email anybody on the planning committee, or you can go to the laconia.net site/join. Also, now there's a Laconia newsletter. So if you're interested in things beyond cataloging, all of the upcoming programs are in that newsletter usually too. And I think that is everything. So thank you, everybody. And I'll let Nancy and Karen hang out for a bit. Everybody else feel free to